Good morning, everyone. I am Kim Riley. I am your host of Tuesday Talks, and I am very excited about today's presentation, as I'm sure you are as well. I am the mom of a 21-year-old son with autism. I know that's hard to believe because I barely look 25, but you know, believe it or not, I am. And so, one of the questions that I have gotten over the years, and that, I don't have the answer to, but we always ask in very hushed tones. It's like we look around and make sure no one's watching, and then we kind of like whisper to each other, how did you talk to him about sex? How do you know that he understands? How do you do this? And so finally, after hearing this so often, I finally did a little research and said, hey, maybe it's time we talked about this, especially since we are cooped up. What better time to broach this subject? So we are going to jump right in and get right to it. And I'm going to just share my screen real quick and go over our outline that we typically follow for Tuesday Talks. So we typically, we started March 31st. We have two sessions, the 10 a.m. morning session and a 6 p.m. evening session. And the agenda that we typically follow is we devote our first 20 minutes to the presentation, and then followed by a 10-minute Q&A. And then the last half of the hour, we focus on resource sharing. How this is a guideline. Sometimes the presentations are lengthier. We just kind of go with whatever amount of time the topic needs. So Dr. Lang, trust me, this is our guideline. Do not feel any pressure to rush through this topic because we definitely need it. And so I'm excited to present our local disability sexpert, Dr. Darrel Lang. He's going to talk to us about sexuality and youth with disabilities. He is going to walk us all through how to have the talk with our children about their changing bodies and about sexuality. I am now going to turn it over to our awesome presenter, Dr. Darrel Lang.
Thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Just to give you a background on myself, I've been in education my whole life. I retired now 7 years ago. I spent 45 years in education and teaching at both the public school and various universities and as a university administrator. And I travel around the world teaching about doing professional development with teachers on meeting the needs of human sexuality in special populations. And so this is one thing that's dear to my heart. I'm not a special ed teacher. I will tell you that. I had 2 courses in my undergraduate and my graduate and doctoral program dealing with special education and sexuality, but I have never taught at a special education itself. So with that, I would like to just share this PowerPoint presentation, which hopefully will get us started about the reasons why we need to do this. And then we'll take some questions, and then I have some resources at the end to help you dealing with some questions that you can use to check yourself on all of this. So anyway, we'll get started with our PowerPoint presentation. So Kim, if you give me the next slide, that'd be great. This is called Are You an Askable Parent? And first of all, the top 10 reasons why we should teach human sexuality. So we'll start with the next slide. And the reasons why we should be teaching about is that, we talk about it is, low reading ability hinders person learning about the person, about the materials. First of all, there are a lot of students in the general population who can't read properly. Many parents can't read properly, and that's nothing negative about them, is because in this topic with the biological aspect, there's some wording that is difficult for people to pronounce. So we don't have to do things in written form. It can be easily done with diagrams, with charts, with pictures. Okay, next one. I'm like David, uh, oh, I just lost the name, Letterman, the top 10 reasons. It says many students with disabilities don't know who or what to ask. There are many general population that don't do that. If I would ask you to go back and think about your own sexuality education from your parents. Now, I grew up in northern Iowa. My mother hardly worked outside the home. My father was originally from Chicago, and he was an orphan at the age of 12 in 1928. At the start of the Depression. You can just imagine all that. So anyway, when I asked my mother a question about sex, I think I was in junior high, and she just said, "Go ask your dad." So my dad told me a dirty joke, and that was my instruction. Um, my two children are now 47 and 45, and they have been raised with their mom and dad, asking them, or being available to ask any questions. And unfortunately, I had too many parents call me up and say, "Would you talk to my son, talk to my daughter?" And I go, "No, that's your job." So we need to keep in mind that this is a topic that involves everybody. And the problem is that too many people get into the topic of sexuality, and again, they're scared about it, they're afraid, they're uncomfortable with it, and it's and one of the things is, we're the most developed country in the world, yet we lead the developed countries in children having children. Um, so what's the problem there? Well, because we approach it as a moral issue, not as a public health issue. And this is something that we need to deal with. This good example of public health issues are going out. So number 8, please. I love this. It says, oh, that's okay. You can go back. Yeah, there we go. Do my parents even know that you're here? That's, a lot of times people don't even want to talk about puberty. Puberty in girls and females starts between the ages 9 through 17, males 12 through 16. That's the general period of one's life. Now, what I always tell people is, when did you start to go through puberty? And the best way to look at that is like our own daughter. She was asking a question, and wife said to her, "Well, this is when I started," and and I said that she said to me, "Well, tell me when did your mom start to go through puberty?" I go, "I don't know, because if I asked that question, she wouldn't answer it." And just like like she said, she never went through menopause. And my sister and I said, "Oh, yes, she did." So my mother lived to be 98 and is now deceased, but again, she didn't want to talk about it. So we need to talk about puberty, because that's the change of our bodies. All right, next slide. This is what happens. You're pregnant. How could this happen? Well, if you don't give the information, uh, then it's uncomfortable, and it's normal for individuals to uh, think about sex and have the thoughts going through their body that are triggered by the hormones that our bodies are producing. That's normal. Okay, next slide. Students who have some form of disability, and if we look at it, we all have some form of disability. Just look at me. I've got glasses. That's a disability. You know, but when anybody has this disability, especially the cognitive disability, that would be a good example how easily they can be exploited. And students have uh, who have a disability are often exploited 2 to 3 times that of the general population. So it's something that we need to be dealing with. Okay, next slide. This is just many students with disabilities don't even have the basic knowledge. There are many general population of basic knowledge. When I was teaching in Emporia State in 1987, the Kansas Department of Education passed a ruling that all schools must have a comprehensive human sexuality education program. And I had 25 superintendents take a 3-hour graduate class from me, 3 hours a day for 5 days for 3 weeks. And they're all males, which wouldn't surprise you in 1987. And in the first hour of class, I gave them a 100-point knowledge test on human sexuality that any 12th grade student should know. The average score on that was 43 out of 100. These were educated individuals. Of course, 3 weeks later, I gave them the same exam, see what the score was. That was, they went up to 86. Of course, that was due to great instruction, of course, but you know, here they don't have the basic knowledge. And so if we don't give information at a level that they can understand, then we have a problem. Next slide. I like this. Last night I asked my parents where I came from. Had this long discussion. I don't know if I'm Irish American, Dutch American, or German American. You know, the father says to his son, and the son says to his dad, "Where do I come from?" And all of a sudden the father goes, "I've been waiting for this call or this question." And all of a sudden he starts to go in this full explanation of all the body. And the son finally says, "I thought we came from Illinois." You know, ask a question. What do you mean by that question? That's the best thing you can do. Communication means to make common. That's what happens. Have to deal with. We have to deal with abstinence. That's an important factor. And I think we have to relate to the fact that we want kids to be abstinent, but we also have to keep in mind we have to give them the skills to make decisions. You know, the frontal lobe of your brain starts to develop somewhere around 11 or 12 and never fully developed till the age of about 22 or 23. Males' frontal lobe, which is for decision making, sometimes occurs later. And as a male, I can say this, probably some of people's frontal lobe never developed. And so when we make decisions, we have to be given the information. It's hard to say no. We just can't say no. I mean, just ask a person, go to a buffet at $7.95, all you can eat. Well, how many times are they going to load up because they got it for $7.95? But they just say no to not eating that much. It's not that easy. And so when a person is body is bathed in hormones, it's hard to say no. But we need to help to prevent the STDs and STIs. You know, when we look at STIs and STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, sexually transmitted infections, there are 26 different kinds, and all of them are treatable, and all of them are curable except for 2. And so we need to be dealing with this and giving them the information. Next slide. Whether your person is has a handicap or a disability or not, they all have the same hormones. They all have the same choices. They all have the same urges. So we have to keep that in mind. Next slide. And it's nothing new. You know, teens' hormones have been coming around since I just had since the times of America being settled. If you take a look at it, actually the Puritans kept all their information in Bibles, and when the person was born, when they were baptized, when they got married. And if you look at it, 50% of the females that came over on the Mayflower were pregnant and unmarried. The Puritans, over almost 50% of them had children within 9 months of marriage. Excuse me, we've had teen pregnancy going on for many, many years. It's nothing new, but we have to give them information that they can understand at their level. Next slide. What I'm sharing with you is some general things. We have there are many people who have limited social skills, and in the general population have limited social skills. Now let's move that to the individuals with uh, some disability. They may have limited social skills as what they can do. Kim, is it moving?
You were cutting out a little bit, so
Okay.
okay. Sorry about
All
that.
right. Can we go to number 3? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Have low self-esteem. I'll do anything to be accepted by their peers. And this happens. Self-esteem is kind of the keystone of human sexuality. If you do nothing more than enhance the self of kids, they'll they'll do fine when it comes to understanding. A young man who's cognitively disabled and he wants to be accepted by everyone in school, and so you'll have a group of guys will say, okay, I'll use his name and say his name is Darrel. Say, Darrel, go over and pull Kim's bra strap. And so Darrel goes over and pulls Kim's bra strap. And who gets in trouble? Darrel. And he thinks it's okay because he feels good about himself because he did what his friends, or what he thought were his friends, and all he did is get him in trouble. So you can see how they can be easily taken advantage of. Next slide. And this is the most important part. IDEA, Individual Disability Act. And this is so important. And I would suggest, and I always tell this with teachers when I'm doing professional development with them, and most of these are special ed teachers. I say, when you're working with your parents, do you build into that IDEA format? Do you make sure you put something in there besides reading and or math or whatever you're doing? Do you put anything in there about sexuality? Because that's something that also needs to be dealt with. So it's very important. Next slide. Most important one here is because they're people first, like all people, they have the right to know what they can comprehend. That's the key, and enable them to become sexually healthy persons. We want kids to be healthy individuals, whether it be physical, mental, spiritual, social, but sexually healthy is just as important. So we'll start with that. I think I have another set of slides on askable parent. Is that right, Kim? Yeah. Are you an askable parent? And this is a key point I think that you have to all take a look at, think about how askable we are. Next slide. Can you explain puberty, including nocturnal emissions and menstruation? We often talk about menstruation, but we don't talk about nocturnal emissions. And that's something we need to deal with. Uh, you know, my wife was an elementary teacher. She had a young lady in class who repeated first grade. And she was, my wife was about 5'3" and about 115 pounds, small teacher. Anyway, this young lady was over 125 pounds as a first grader. So her body composition was higher. That's where your hormones develop through your body comp. In October of her second year of first grade, all of a sudden she stood up and she screamed because there was blood on her chair in her desk. Wouldn't anybody scream if you had blood coming out of an orifice of your body? And nobody had ever dealt with her at that point. And so the school nurse, the school psych, the school social worker, and the parents all had to work very quickly with her to help deal with that. And also the trauma that the other students around saw in that context. So it was kind of a teachable moment, one heck of a way to be a teachable moment. Next slide. You know, I think you ought to talk about masturbation fantasy. Um, the M word is nobody likes to talk about it, but you know, noises. And when we look at those, when a child is born, the first thing they want to do is they'll touch their genitalia, and all of a sudden somebody yells at them, "Don't do that!" And so there's that point of, well, I don't shouldn't do that. That's a normal function, but it's something that has to be done in privacy, and so it's a very normal act. Okay, next slide. We have to explain reproduction, human reproduction, but on a level that they can understand. And so that's one of the things we have to keep in mind is we don't give it the level that they would understand. Let's say they're chronologically 17, but if their cognitive level is at the level of a 7-year-old, you have to teach them what a 7-year-old should know. And I can provide all kinds of resources on those factors too. All right, next slide. We need to talk about abstinence. We need to talk about birth control. But again, birth control is, fortunately, we've gotten away from not too many years ago when a person was cognitively disabled, the form of birth control was to sterilize, which is atrocious. But there are all forms of birth control that could be used today. That can be medically used with IUDs, with shots, and so forth. So those are things that need to be addressed. Next slide. Sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. Again, 2 to 3 times more than the general population. So we need to teach about how to say no, how to say how to report it, and we need to, as parents, listen to understand what they might say. I have a scenario I use in my workshop where there's a young man who said, I put the teachers in a group of about 5 teachers, and one of them gets the scenario and it reads, I'm a first grade student, and I come up to my teacher and I said, my uncle's, this is a first grade young lady, and she says, my uncle's going to come over and stay at my house, and he's going to sleep with me. Now, some people would sit there and go, that's terrible. Well, that young man could be younger, that uncle could be younger than the young lady. So we have to understand, we have to ask some questions and communicate. Next slide. Again, sexual harassment is occurring. There's no place for it, and we have to, again, communicate of how do you respond, how do you what do you do, how do you as a parent listen with your eyes and with your ears. Next. You know, there's different roles and the different genders. Things have changed. You know, when I was graduating from high school many years ago, possibility for a female were basically a teacher, a nurse, and a housewife or a secretary. That was about it. Today, 75% of the OBGYNs in training today are females. That's significant. So we've seen changes in gender roles and gender identity. So we can't always say you got to be like a little girl or a little boy. You got to, you know, little boys can play with dolls and little girls can play with trucks. Make a difference. Next slide. Sexual orientation is a difficult thing for some people. It wasn't too many years ago that sexual orientation was listed as a mental disability. But people are so concerned about someone who's gay or lesbian, bisexual, transgendered. I have to say, as an educator, I'll tell you this: my whole thought, just me speaking. Many of the individuals I know who are gay, have a gay lifestyle or transgender lifestyle, have a better handle of their own sexuality than individuals who are heterosexual. So that's all I'm going to say about that at this particular point. Next slide. Again, we talk about sexually transmitted disease, the treating of the occurring of this, and how they can recognize if they have a problem with it. Next slide. Again, same thing with AIDS, HIV. It has to be done through blood. And this is an important part, is the social cultural influences. I always share with people when I'm doing this around the country, and I'll say, I live in Kansas. How many languages do you think are, what do we, when you think of Kansas, what do you think of? They say, well, first of all, they say the Wizard of Oz, and then they say it's flat, and they say it's all white. Well, yeah, it's predominantly uh, Caucasian, but a large population is Latino. And in fact, there are 93 different languages or dialects spoken in Kansas schools. So it's a cultural differences, and each culture has a different ideas about sexuality, and that's also plays into how we talk about it. Next slide. We have to talk about risky behaviors, substance abuse, and that may not be too much of a problem, but it can be a problem with students with certain disabilities. But we have to take a look at that section about the risky behaviors that they take. And they, again, risky behaviors often come back to, I want to feel good about myself. I want someone to like me. So I'll do this. Next slide. And we have to be able to talk to our children about intimate details. You have to open up. You have to be comfortable with your own sexuality first. Next slide. Okay, how about we open it up for questions at this point, Kim?
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Dr. Lang?
Hello. Okay, I have a question.
Yes, Cynthia.
Okay, my question is, I have never really approached the subject with my son. He's 22 years old. He has
Okay.
learning disabilities. So his father passed away a couple of years ago. I'm assuming maybe they had some kind of conversation, but I don't know, I guess, where to start at. Do you like this nice PowerPoint that you have, I guess, is a format that we can use. So is this something that we can use later on as, or do we have to, can we get the information because you have it gathered together where you want to make sure that you hit the high points the way you have it organized? Is this something that we can get or that we can come back and look at later or copy or something?
Yeah, Cynthia, that's a good question. And Kim, you'll make this available for them, is that correct?
I will. And then also, I will share, there's another handout. It's like a tips and tricks guide, so to speak. And so I'll share that with you all afterwards, and we can also review it here so you can get
Right.
an idea of what'll be
Yeah,
coming.
I do want to do that. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but going back to Cynthia, your son has learning disability, is that correct?
Well, he has the diagnosis of Asperger's,
Okay, Asperger. Yeah, okay.
autism.
All right.
Uh-huh.
There's I'll send this to Kim. I have a bunch of resources in there. I'm going to just refer you. There's a book that came out about 2 years ago on Asperger's and sexuality, and I would suggest that might be something to look into um, as a resource. But I think, yeah, people say, when's a good time to talk to them? I said, the general population, I tell them, put them in the car, say you're going to the mall, because that'll get them excited that you're going to go shopping, and then just drive around all day and ask them questions. And they'll say, Mom, I don't want to answer that question. So, well, share with them what it was like for you growing up and whether you got any answers, got any questions, or when you ask questions, did you get any response? You have to open up to your kids and show them that, and it's okay. I mean, I like I said, I was in education for 40 plus years, and yeah, I have a PhD in this topic, but I'm still learning. Anytime I think I know it all, it's time for me to quit. It's ridiculous. We got to constantly look at learning and saying, what can I do to help other people? And that would be number one, our own children. What can we do to help that? My own children, my son's not married. He's the oldest. He's 47. My daughter's 43. She has 3 children, 17, 14, and 8. And as her kids started to go through puberty, she would often say, "Okay, Dad, help me out here. Is this what I'm supposed to do?" I go, "Well, what did we do for you?" She goes, "Well, that's what I thought." I go, "There you go. You were taught pretty good. Now pass it on." And it's worked out fine for them. But you gotta answer. You've gotta open yourself up and share with them, and ask them if they have questions. And how are you gonna answer that? Okay.
Cynthia, I was wondering, one of the generous offers that Dr. Lang made was that he is willing to have an offline conversation with families, with up to 3 families, to kind of coach you through, talking with your child. Would you be willing to reach out to him?
I could definitely do that, and that way I can, you can kind of let me know if I'm on track. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
That sounds good, Dr. Lang?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, Cynthia, I will reach out to you and send you his contact information, and you can have the expert to guide you through.
Now, remember, an expert is an old drip under pressure. Yeah, right? Yeah.
Okay. Marianne?
Okay, great. Thanks, Kim, again. Dr. Lang, thank you so much. This is such an important topic. And I work at Children's Mercy, and I'm the education coordinator for autism. And this is a topic we do get a lot of questions about. And we have presentations about pretty much once a year for our families. But the perspective, I just like so many things that you said, the perspective that I want to also give you and ask maybe how else it can be done is one of a parent. And my daughter Kaylee, who will actually be 27 tomorrow, functions at a intellectual level of about 12 to 18 months. And she is beautiful. She is fully developed. I've joked that the only thing she did ahead of schedule was get her period. Which was really hard for me. She's our oldest, and then we have 2 typical kids following her. But what I wanted to tell you was, and ask you, she was on birth control for a number of years, continues to be on birth control. But last year I did have the decision, after a lot of thought and a lot of prayer, to have her tubes tied, because she's beautiful, she's completely nonverbal, and just about a year and a half ago, she moved to a supported group home, which we vetted very well, just like we did every single helper that of the 100 that worked for our family over the years. But, what do you advise a parent that now, who has had a controlled setting all of their life with their kiddo, now, has made the decision, because frankly, for Dan and I, we knew that she was probably going to outlive us. She's healthy as healthy can be. And yet we knew how incredibly vulnerable out in the world she was. So I believe in this for all of our typical kids and for our kids with special needs that have some degree of understanding. I just don't know how else you would advise. And having said that, I'm going to tell you one more thing. Interestingly enough, after we did this and I filled out her yearly report to the state, I put in there that we had her tubes tied, and it was an outpatient procedure. She got along great. I brought her home for several days. The judge called me and called me to court, and because I'm her guardian, as is her dad, and we learned that actually we weren't allowed to do that. And I know I signed those guardian papers, but I didn't realize that wasn't a decision without a court order we were able to make. So I'm putting that out there for any other parent that is thinking about something. But I just wonder what other type of advice you would have families like ours, because frankly, there's quite a few of us as well.
Yeah, a good point. And I can empathize. I can understand your concern with the, the what you had to deal with as far as thinking about having your daughter permanently sterilized was a major decision. But you also you have to protect your children,
Yeah.
and that's very, very important. I think the point you bring up is when someone's thinking about that, they need to also always consult with an attorney
Yes.
to make those points, and also share. And you may have done this besides your husband, but other family members. So other family members somewhere down the tree understand what's going on, why it's going on,
Mhm.
total clarification. Again, as much communication as can be possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I appreciate and that question or that statement, and I can understand that it would be that'd be a hard decision to make as a parent. Uh, you know, um, like you said, you know, everything came together. Her period came, and
Yep.
everything she developed fine, but she's totally vulnerable in many situations, and um, it's I don't want to say burden, but it's a lot that's put on us as parents. We want to do the best we can for our children, as you know. Unfortunately, some both my kids sometimes say, "You try to do too much, just slack off, would you?" Okay. So, but I said, well, I said to my daughter, I said, well, you're a parent now and you're going to say the same things. She
That's
goes,
right.
I know, I've already caught myself saying the things. So, um, it's, it's a, it's a good, I appreciate you sharing what you did, and that helps others to
Mhm.
think about that, and hopefully that would come together. One other thing I'd just like to tell you that Mercy Children's Mercy is one of our co-sponsors for our adolescent health conference we have every year in June at the Kansas City
Excellent.
Airport Hilton,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate their support there. It's great organization.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for what you're doing. I do think it's critically important, and it is critically important for our typical kids too, just like you're saying. And I think because there's so much out there in society doesn't mean that they understand what's out there and the intention with what's out there. And I mean, my kids, they laugh at me. My typical kids laugh at me because I'll ask them, what about pornography? Mom, for Pete's sakes, no, I'm not doing that. Like, okay, all right, just checking. I mean, I'm kind of constantly checking in with them because there's so many things that are available without us knowing, and that doesn't mean that the understanding is behind them or the intention even. And so I think you just bring up such a good thing. I grew up in northern Iowa too, by the way,
Where?
and Fort Dodge.
Fort Dodge.
Yeah.
I grew up in New Hampton. My uncle
Oh,
and his
sure.
family lived in Fort Dodge. Percy Adelson was the last name. Yeah,
Awesome.
small world, huh?
It's a really small
Yeah,
world.
no kidding.
Hey, I'm gonna jump in real quick, everyone. I wanted to share the
That's right.
the handout that we're going to be sharing afterwards. I'm trying to do that though, but okay. I think I have to oh no, here it is. Okay, I thought I was going to have to reformat it. Okay, so here is kind of the tips and tricks guide for talking with your children that Dr. Lang has prepared for us, and it'll be included in this week's resource list. And so he goes through kind of how to set the stage. You want to set aside time for talking and listening, and that maybe even like at the dinner table could be a time to maybe broach the subject. He goes on to give us some tips on active listening, watching their facial expressions and their body language to kind of gauge their understanding or their comfort level. Again, we as parents are always trying to shield our babies, so we want to try not to jump in and cut the child off and we want to make sure that we're listening. We don't want to just rush into problem-solving mode. Again, we want to make sure that we're in active listening mode. And then we want to really make sure our instructions and requests are simple. Sometimes we can be so uncomfortable with the conversation that, as Dr. Lang was sharing in the presentation, the kid doesn't know what we're talking about when if we can be so abstract. And then he goes into some more tips that really this whole subject of sexuality, it can start as early as possible. And he talks through what's an age-appropriate conversation. And then how do we start conversations about sex and relationships? And then how do we answer questions about sex and relationships?
One thing I would say, I'm sorry, kid, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, you're fine.
No, one thing you'll find is I repeat myself a lot in these listings, because that's a good way to kind of reinforce, so you hear it more than once, kind of like you told your children, tell them over and over again. We do that. Use correct terminology too.
Okay.
I have a hand. I call it a hand. I don't call it a waiver. It's called a hand. Here, I'm waving at you. That's my hand. Okay. Now I'm not going to go to the next part. As a male, I have a penis, but I don't call it a one-eyed trouser snake, heat-seeking missile, Mr. Happy, the Big Johnson. I have 93 different terms for penis that I've gotten from people around the world. I mean, call it what it is. That's what it is. It's you call the vagina the vagina.
Denise is just mortified over here.
Well, this is probably something you don't bring up when auntie and uncle are over for lunch or dinner, and they'll choke on their food. So, but it's I just say you have to use the correct term or the terms that they can understand. Now, the only time I'd say that you allow slang terms would be if you're talking about sexual abuse, and they may say, a young lady may call her vaginal area her garage. That may have a term that she uses. And she says, my uncle's going to come over and park in my garage. What do you mean by park in your garage? So, it's a fine line you have to use, but try to use correct anatomical terms. And if anything else, whenever a bookstore opens, you can go out and buy from Barnes and Noble books on sexuality. It gives you a reason to go to that section of self-help and buy. We can't educate ourselves enough. You really can't. And so I highly suggest it to you. And also practice. Practice. Stand in front of the mirror and say, here, use the word penis. Here's the thing I do with my teachers is, just 1 second, please. I'm being interrupted.
And we have about 10 more minutes. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Lang once he finishes his point? Denise, you have one?
Somebody coming to the house.
Okay.
That's okay. Anyway, when I use the term, when you're dealing with the correct terminology, they use the word penis. That's what you say. And I'll say, if you have a hard time with this, just say happiness, then say happiness, and then say penis. I said, next time you're in church, the minister, the rabbi, or the priest are up in the pulpit and they're talking about happiness, you will be the only one that knows what they're talking about. So
On that note, Denise, you have a question?
sorry.
Hi, Dr. Lang.
I have strange
Thank
humor.
you very much for this opportunity
You bet.
for the enlightenment. Truly, from the expressions on my face, I've been enlightened this morning.
You'll never forget happiness.
Okay, so my son is just turned 19. He is a child diagnosed with Asperger's. We've had a couple of incidents occur in the last year, one of which where he was in an internship and subsequently lost the job because one of the young ladies that he was friendly with said her feet hurt, and he told her she could sit on his lap and he would rub her feet. Well, someone else heard that, and he got let go. Talked to him about that, got him through that. Yeah, I know. But more recently, on the funnier side, and I'm sharing all of this with you because it has this sunny days and it has its dark days. And so we've experienced both within this last probably 6 months. And so I'm struggling to anticipate what's going to come next and what I'm going to say. But the most recent one, and I'll just combine everything, was we got a package in the mail. And it was from somebody's smash saver to my address. And I opened it, and it was a toy. And I tried to talk to him, and his dad tried to talk to him, and we told him that this behavior was normal and whatnot. And we went through all of that. And then later on that day, he calls me and asks me, will I stop and get him some lube? And so then I'm like, that didn't go well. Please don't call me and ask me that. And so of course I said, go call your daddy. But so now, as I want to inform him and protect him and all of that stuff, I'm scared to death now. So what do I do? Yeah, go
ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm good.
Okay. It's you have a perfect opportunity to sit and talk, to open up what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what to ask for. That may be difficult for him to understand, but I think you have to just keep repeat. Growing up as a student without any disability, now I remember my father just sometimes telling me 19 times to do something before it finally went through.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's multiply that times with someone with your son's condition,
mm-hmm.
situation. I don't want to say condition, situation.
Yeah.
That it's just something that it's going to take a long time. But the resources I'm going to send to Kim, who will then send them on to you, there are some really good books that I think if you look at, you can get that, and it'll help you. It'll help you. It's something that's going to have to take some time, and it's not. You can't do this once. It's going to have to be constant repetition, and helping them through this process, and helping yourself through this process too.
Right. Well, the overarching objective for us is making sure that he is very, very transparent with us.
Correct.
Because that allows us to protect him when things occur, like the previous scenario that I was sharing with you. Right. The fact that he was very honest. And even when he was pulled into the office to explain that, he said, yes, I said that. But what they didn't understand was because he's in a household with a mother and father who are very caring, and we display affection. He's seen me say my feet hurt, and his dad say, "Let me help you."
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
because he is, and I'll go ahead and say, because he is a 6 foot, 250-pound young Black man
Yep.
in an environment that was, he was the only Black man there, and this was a young white girl. And my son loves everybody. We teach him that way. But the person that was observing this, I'd seen this person before. I could read this person's disposition. And so it's situations like that, when he's coming into his sexuality, when he's coming into his kindness, you know, they just really, really scare me. And I want to make sure that he's informed, but I don't want to take the loving that we've provided and taught him to be able to expend and share with everybody away. I don't want to teach him to be afraid to say, "Let me help you."
Mhm.
You know, let me, and if helping you involves touching you, I don't know that he will always make the right choice in words.
Sure. Yeah.
And that whomever may be observing this may misunderstand. And before I can get to him to help him or to explain a situation, God knows where that could land him.
Sure.
Absolutely. Denise, quick question. Do you think it would benefit you and your husband and your son to maybe have a session with Dr. Lang?
Possibly so. We had talked to his regional office of disabilities caseworker about the situation. But what is also going on is, as he is 19 years old, he is experimenting with the right to work. And so the opportunities to get him into counseling, whatnot, have been temporarily put on the back burner as he's going into a work environment and trying to learn that aspect of becoming self-sufficient, which is very important. Now, in this time when we're all dealing with this COVID thing and being in and video, this may be the perfect time to possibly try to arrange something video-wise.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
so that he can talk and express and get a better understanding about things.
So I would love to connect you all afterwards. And that was one of the reasons why we were having this topic at this time. We're all cooped up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is the perfect time to broach this subject. So I think that would definitely be a starting point for you all, if you're open
he's
to it.
very impressionable, and he just wants to be a part of the human race. Whatever's going on, I'm in. I just want to be there. And so, you know, even now he comes in and I noticed that he's met a new group of folks. And so, you know, there are changes in the way he wants to dress and different things like that. And he's driving now, you know. So there are all of these things that are coming for him. So that would be wonderful, Kim. Thank you.
Okay, we'd be glad to. Hey, we have a few more minutes. Any other questions? Okay, I will be glad to follow up and to send not only today's presentation, but to also make sure that I connect Cynthia and Denise with Dr. Lang. And if you have someone that you want to connect with Dr. Lang, that would be great. Also, he'll be back next week. And Denise and Cynthia, we hope that you come back next week and maybe share what you learned or just sit in. You know, it's totally up to you. We're just trying to create a really safe space, a sacred space, so that we can make sure that we have our time and that we are really, we want to leave this quarantine, we want to leave it united, we want to leave it stronger, and we want to leave it better than when we entered it. So, and I think we're well on our way.
I want to take the opportunity to thank Kim for hooking me up with all of you and for you sharing, and hopefully I was able to give you some points. I will send to Kim, I'll send her a listing of these various books and literature that you might want to take a look at. And feel free to call out to me anytime. And uh, my name is Darrel. I was born Darrel, and I'll die Darrel. You know, and it's just because I got those 3 letters behind my name doesn't mean anything. It's like when I did get my PhD, my daughter was 8 at the time, and someone called her house and said, you know, we taught her how to answer the phone, and someone called and said, "Can I talk to Dr. Lang?" And she said, "Who?" And they go, "Dr. Lang, he is a doctor." And she's, "Yeah, but he's not the kind that can help you." So that's who I am. I'm just Darrel. I'm born Darrel, and I'll die Darrel. So feel free to call me that. That's okay. No problems.
Great,
But
great.
I want to share with you, and if I can help in any way, feel free to do that.
Cool. And you all may know we have a 6 o'clock session tonight. And so if you want to join us tonight, if you want to spread the word to others tonight, that would be absolutely awesome. And then I just have a couple of other resources to share with us. Each week we have a little resource list. And so this week's resource, I will share the Autism Society of America has a COVID toolkit that's been assessed by 57,000 people, and it includes a weekly Facebook Live series. And so I will include a link to that. Also, we got information from our good friend Jenny at ETAS about Station MD, which is telehealth, which was founded by some ER docs for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so this is, as we all know, a really good resource. Our children tend to have higher rates of anxiety, and so being able to provide a telehealth resource to them would be a really good resource. So those, in addition to the information by our wonderful presenter, we'll also have that as well. Does anyone else have any information or any resources that they would like to share? Okay, cool. Well, I will be following up. Thank you so much. Woo, woo, woo! Darrel.
Thank
You know,
you.
I was getting ready to say Dr. Lang, right?
Yeah,
Thank you so much. As you all know, this is the first part of a 2-part series. So Darrel, and we'll be back next week. Denise has shared that she will share parts of their conversation and their family experience. And if you just want to share with others, we have a 6 o'clock session tonight. And then we have a 10 o'clock and a 6 o'clock session next week, our part 2. So thanks everyone. And you all have a wonderful day. Right.